Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Sorry about the late start. I was having some technical difficulties, but thank you for sticking with me. I see some of you guys are already here. Thank you for the warm welcome. Everybody's interested in mixing colors. I'm actually going to be doing some traditional mixing as well as digital because I can see that people are struggling with both. And I'm gonna start with some traditional mixing. So if you guys have any questions or any colors that you want to see me mix, let me know in the chat. And I can see that Kevin and Joanne, our lovely mods, are both here. So I might need your help. If you see a question that I missed in the chat, please just let me know. Yeah, so anyway, thanks so much, guys, for being here. I am really excited. I've got all my colors out today. I spent a really long time just like going through all my colors and reminiscing about all of the ones that I bought that I never ended up using. So, yeah, if you guys have any questions at all about mixing color, whether it's traditional, whether it's digital, don't hold back today, because today I will be answering all of your questions, or as many as I can get through. But we're going to start off with our introduction. So if we haven't met before, my name is Fei. I specialize in drawing and painting, and I use all mediums. I use both traditional and digital mediums. And this is weird. My 101 is blurry. Let me try and redo this again. What's bothering me? There we go. Okay. So yeah, so I'm an instructor and I teach drawing and painting mentorship. I also teach figure drawing, and our mission at Winged Canvas is to make art and education easily accessible to everyone. So you can tune in for free lessons every weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 3 p.m. And if you didn't know, our growing community is filled with tons of art nerds, and we art nerds have to stick together. So if you're an art nerd too, be sure to check out the links in our social media. And we are just at Winged Canvas. And you can also check out our website for free class offerings. And we're not just a YouTube channel, we are a school of illustration. I want to also personally thank our wonderful patrons. Without you, we can't make these free arts education streams. So thank you very much for being a member. You can actually become a member on YouTube or Discord. Or sorry, YouTube or Patreon. All right, so this here is my really, really big, what is this, like a color chart that I ended up painting. So I painted this back in university, and it was probably one of my most ambitious projects. I painted this manually using oil paints as a way to understand how to mix color. And, you know, looking at it now, I can still see some inconsistencies. So if you are, you know, I'm not going to paint this or something like this on stream because it's just way too time consuming. So I figured on stream I could just kind of explain how I mix colors, and you guys can kind of choose, like I might just choose some random colors within here and show you how I would mix it, and also how I would mix, like you can mix colors. You could mix this color, for example, with very different colors. Like I could probably mix this green without even using blue. And I could mix it with, you know, using blue. So you can mix the same color using different colors. And that's also kind of cool, right? So I want to focus on things like that. And so yeah, this color wheel, the way I started painting this was I just used the primary colors. Sorry for the glare there, but the background here is all gray, and it's like a middle gray, right? And then it goes, I have a very large value scale. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15. It's 15 shades, actually 13 shades of gray plus black and white. Now you don't need that many. That's overkill. Like I suggest to my students, just start with 3. Start with your white, your black, and your middle gray, and then add 2 more. Right? Then go to 5, and then go to 7. But I usually like this. This is a little bit too much. You don't really need this many value steps. But for this exercise, what we wanted to do is just create a very, very smooth gradient. So if you squint at this, you know, you might see some colors that are a little bit darker, like this red here is a little bit darker. But essentially, I was trying to create a digital color wheel or a histogram, right? With traditional paints. And it was very, very tough to do. I like messed up on some values over here, right? This one's a little bit too light. But anyway, this took me about 60 hours, maybe 40 to 60 hours to paint. So I'm not going to do that on stream, but I can explain some of the things that I struggled with, and I can share some of my tips with you. Okay, so welcome in. I can see Lycan Arts, you were here first. Hello. I see some new names here. Let me know if this is your first stream with us. Hello, Zather and Kazoo. Hello, Ja Redstone Guy. Welcome, welcome. One of our lovely members. Broken Wing Zeal. Hello, another great artist and member. Jasmine T. Starverse. Woo, we've got a lot today. Okay. All right, so let's go to submissions first. We always like to recognize our amazing community. So this month's challenge is colorations. So colorations is all about exploring color, right? So Iggy is streaming tomorrow. You have one last chance to submit your artwork to be featured on stream. But the ones that I selected today, the first one is by Traditional Bread Wizard. I just love this piece. It also works upside down, which is really cool. I've done some kind of upside down faces or images that can be reversed as well. And I just thought it was a beautiful sort of warm versus cool approach, and the characters are really interesting. So way to go. Really love this piece. And second piece is by Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword, this piece is really, really nice. I don't know if you just took a picture with like bluish lighting or if the entire piece is kind of blue. Not really sure, but anyway, I really like the skin tones that you got here. You know, the kind of duller skin tones are working really nicely with like the touches of blush. That looks really nice as well. So love seeing traditional artwork in the submissions as well. And our last one is by Sue Jammin. So I just thought this piece was so fun, and like there's, you know, it just feels really what's the word, like eclectic, you know? It's kind of like I can't really think of the color scheme. It's a little bit wild, just like the painting itself, but I just like how fun it is and how much it draws me in, especially these blue glowing lizards. So even though there's a lot of color theory and all these like palettes that you're supposed to use, this month's challenge is to actually break those rules sometimes, you know, and just go nuts. So yeah, definitely rules are meant to be broken. And it's always fun to experiment and not always, you know, follow those rules. So great work, guys. Keep those challenges, submissions coming. It's a great way to motivate yourself to try something new. All right. So I was talking about ways to think about color. So I'm going to start with probably some do's and don'ts, because I know that a lot of times when we are working with color, you know, we tend to just focus on color and forget about a lot of things. So we're going to start off with some don'ts. Okay. Let's do this in red. Some do's and don'ts. Okay. So the most common thing that I see is people starting off by using too many colors. So, uh-oh, my tablet's being a little bit weird today. Oh no! Oh no! Okay, I'm gonna do my notes traditionally. 1 second here. I'm gonna bring out my sketchbook. Or maybe I just have to restart my Krita, actually. Let me try that first. Sorry about that. 1 second here. Sometimes my Krita is likes to be weird and not work properly. Okay, let's try this again. It's like, no, don't mess with my writing. All right. Okay, there we go. Let's hope it stays this way. Okay, so the first thing is don't start with too many colors. This is probably the most common mistake. What people tend to do is, you know, they buy those big sets of like 48 colors or 72 colors. I see Liquitex makes like a 72 color set. Like, that's overwhelming. And you'll never really be good at mixing colors if you have too many pre-mixed colors, right? Like, if that doesn't make any sense. So what you want to do is you want to start with just a basic set. So like, you know, you only need 5 to 12 colors. Okay. And then we're actually making a video that's going to be released very shortly, probably on Wednesday, all about the colors and my color recos. So I'm not going to spoil it, but the 5 colors, as you would have guessed, are your primaries, right? So your 3 primaries plus black and white. Okay. To get really, really good at mixing colors, you only need your 3 primaries plus black and white. And this works with not just paint, it also works with ink, it works with colored pencils, it works with all kinds of other mediums. So don't fret. You know, if you're like, oh, I want to try a new medium, but I don't want to get all the colors. Well, you don't need to. You only need 5, and that's it. So brown is kind of a pain in the butt to mix. So if you had to supplement, the other colors would be like a brown, and then you could get like a warm and a cool version. of each primary. Okay, so for example, a primary red, even though this looks like it's a primary red, primary red is actually more of a magenta, so it's kind of like in between here. Okay, so the primary colors that we learned in school are not actually the true primary colors. Like, if you mixed this red and this blue together, you probably won't get a very vibrant purple. You just won't, because this red has yellow in it, right? So it's not actually a true primary. So if I was to get, I'll go more into like more details into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to put that out there. Let's see here. Let me just get a. Oh, you got a preview. Okay. So a warm and cool version of each primary. So for the yellows, I would probably get like the only yellow that you need is really like a lemon yellow or like a cadmium yellow light. And then I would also get a yellow ochre. So yellow ochre is an earth tone, but if I had to choose two yellows, I would choose these two. So cadmium yellow light, get the hue, like don't get the real cadmium because cadmium is poisonous. Cadmium yellow light hue or yellow ochre, or sorry, and yellow ochre. Okay, so yellow ochre is an earth tone. So it's slightly duller. It's kind of here, like it's like a little bit closer to orange, and it's a lot darker. Okay, in terms of the reds, I would get something like a magenta, which is like a cooler red. Other colors that are close to it are alizarin crimson. It's also like a very transparent red. And then I would get like a cadmium red light. So your magenta, alizarin crimson is your cool, right? And then your warm is your cadmium red. Cadmium red medium, probably. Okay. And then in terms of the blue, so this blue looks like it's closer to ultramarine. So for the two blues, I would get ultramarine, and phthalo. So ultramarine blue and phthalo blue. So phthalo blue is like closer to green. So it's cooler, greener, and your ultramarine blue is warmer and closer to purple. I'm going to say, yeah, closer to purple. Purpler. Is that a word? Purpler. Okay. So the two blues, like one would be a little bit closer to green and then the other one would be closer to violet. So yellow is the only color, because it's so light, right? I would just get like a lighter yellow and like a slightly darker yellow, right? Because yellow, you know, you can shift it warmer or cooler by just adding red to it or by adding blue to it. Just that little bit. So yellow is the only color where I would get a warm and cool version. Instead of getting a warm and cool version, I would get an earth tone and a primary. Okay. So so you could either get 3 primaries or you can get 6 of these colors plus black and white and a brown. So if you got 6 plus black and white, that's 8. Plus a brown would be 9, right? So about 9 colors, but you don't need more than that, especially if you want to get really good at mixing colors yourself, right? Okay, let me just make these notes a little bit smaller. Okay, so don't start with too many colors. All right, so that would be the first mistake that I see people make, is they start with too many colors, they get super excited and like buy that huge set of colors and then end up only using up the yellows, using up the white, and then like, uh-oh, I have all these greens that I'm never gonna use. Has that ever happened to you? If that's happened to you, let me know, because it definitely happened to me. And one time I remember like the green paint went on sale and I bought like 3 tubes of green that were just like these huge tubes of oil paint, and I still have them. It's like it's been like 20 years and I still have them. So yeah, don't start with too many colors. It's expensive and it's unnecessary. Okay, so the second most like the second most common mistake that people make is they mix dull colors using bright colors. Don't mix dull colors. Don't mix dull colors using bright colors. Like, sometimes you have to, right? Like if you're starting off with just your primaries, then you really only have one yellow, right? But it's much better to start with your dull colors. So start with dull colors like earth tones. Okay, so for example, if you wanted to mix a color that was kind of like, let's see, if you were to mix a color that was like this olive green, right? If you wanted to mix like this color, I wouldn't start off by using, like if you only had your primaries, right? You would need a lot of yellow. So if you were starting off with just your primaries, you would need yellow. Then you would use blue, right? You would add like a very, very small amount of blue, like probably that much. And then you would also add a black. So black isn't on here, but, right, because these are really only what, you know, the only ones that you have to work with. So in terms of ratio, it'd be a lot of yellow, a little bit of blue, a little bit of black, okay? But if you had your earth tones, like let's say you had a yellow ochre, right? So a yellow ochre would kind of look like this color here, right? If you have a yellow ochre, right, then you don't need to take your lemon yellow or your cadmium yellow and add, you know, make it duller. You can just start off with your duller color, because first of all, duller colors like earth tones are more natural looking and they are cheaper. Okay, so don't if you can, don't mix dull colors using bright colors. So if I was to make this green, for example, right, we can see where the green is on this color wheel, right, on this diagram here. So you can see if I drag this across, this green becomes more saturated, right? Less saturated, more saturated. If I dragged that green up and down, you can see it gets lighter and darker. And then, you know, if I dragged it, you can increase the saturation, you can increase the value. And so the green, if the green is duller, right, then you could probably start with black. So you could probably mix this green, and we're gonna try it, but you could probably mix it with your lemon yellow. So actually I would choose a yellow that's more of a primary yellow. So it would probably be like this. Okay, so this would be your lemon yellow. The first yellow that I put down was actually more of a cadmium red medium, or more of like a medium yellow, but not a primary yellow. So if you have your primary yellow like this, right, then really what you would need to add to it is just like a touch of black. So like a touch of black. Right? And then it will, because the yellow is so bright, right? That black is just going to tip it towards green, because when you add light yellow or white to the, like when you add white to black, it actually turns like it's like a cool color. It's like closer to blue. So you can mix this green with different types of mixtures, right? And so you don't really need to dull your bright colors. You can start with dull colors. So I would like basically, if I had a choice, I would mix it this way. I would start with my yellow ochre because it's already pretty close to the green, right? It's already like the same saturation, pretty dull, and it's already like similar in value, right? So when you start mixing a color, you want to start by choosing a color that is similar to it. So similar in value or similar in hue. Okay. Okay, so the next one is don't prioritize color over value. So this is one that I see a lot. I see a lot of people go, oh my gosh, like they take out a lot of colors, they want to do a portrait, and then the colors are all over the place and they're getting frustrated. And so I always tell my students, okay, if you are having trouble with value, don't start color. Like fix your values first, because if you jump into color without understanding value, it is so frustrating. It gets immensely frustrating. So value and color are let me write this down. Value and color are both elements of art. But value I'm gonna say trumps color. I'm just gonna say this, you know, it may not be true for all cases, okay? So don't take this literally, but in general, value is more important, because you can have a painting work in any color as long as the values work. So I'm going to show you an example of this, okay? So let's see if I can pull up some examples. Okay, I just found a painting that I did years ago, but let's see. Okay, so this is a portrait that I painted of John Singer Sargent, one of my heroes. And you can see that the top part is painted in, you know, your traditional skin tones. Okay, so the skin tones that I use to paint the top are probably burnt sienna, burnt umber, yellow ochre, and cadmium red. maybe I used alizarin. Sometimes I use alizarin crimson for like the nostrils and the ears because it's just like a nice dark transparent red. But most of what I used for his face are earth tones. Okay. Contrary to that, what I use for the bottom are just like crazy colors, right? Like all kinds of pastels and like weirdly saturated colors and all of that. And this wasn't really this was more of an artistic experiment to explain to my students that if you can figure out the value and prioritize your values, you can get away with any color. Okay. So if you struggle with values, just don't stress about color just yet. Okay, get those values right, and then move on to really challenging yourself to understand color. Okay. So the next point that I have is don't confuse middle gray as 50% black plus 50% white. Have you guys ever made a, tried to mix a gray? Okay, you tried to mix a gray and you do this. You're like, okay, I'm gonna mix a gray. So I'm gonna start off with like black, right? Then I'm gonna add white and I assume it's gonna be the same amount, 50% black and 50% white. So I can't actually do this digitally, but pretend that I'm putting down white here. Let me just choose like a, okay, let's pretend this is white, okay? So I do 50% black and 50% white. Well, what color is that gonna get you? Is it gonna get you that middle gray, right? If you wanted to get a middle gray like this, chances are you're gonna be using like 90% white and like 10% black. Right? So the actual ratio is maybe like this. Okay. So don't confuse middle gray as 50% black and 50% white. So this is like the visual mix is different when you're mixing colors, right? Mixing colors visually is different than mixing colors technically. Okay, so like color mixing isn't technical, like isn't technical percentages. It's visual and much more intuitive. Much more intuitive. So why I say this is because if I told you, and like when we teach online classes, right? If I said to my students, okay, I want you to take out your white and I want you to take out, mix 80% white and 20% black. Well, if my student is using like a student grade white and like a professional black, that black is going to be more pigmented than the white, right? So different paints, I'm going to say pigments actually to be more correct. So different pigments and brands and quality affect the colors or affect the color mixing. Okay, which is why you really should mix as a visual exercise. It's a lot more intuitive and it's definitely not technical. Okay, so if I'm using like Liquitex Professional acrylic gouache and for my white, and then I'm using like a cheap student grade green or something, and I would have to use more of that green than if I used a professional quality one, right? So different pigments and brands will affect the color quality, so you got to be a little bit more careful with that. It doesn't just apply to middle gray, it also applies to other colors. So also applies to other colors. Okay, so how many are we at there? These are the most common mistakes. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. I believe I wrote down 6. Okay, so when you're mixing, don't start with darker hues. Start with the hue that's closest to the value of, this is a long one, of the desired color. Don't start with darker hues, start with the hue that's closest to the value of the desired color. So basically what this means is, like, if you are working with, like, let's say you wanted to mix this green, right? Back to this green example, it's better to start with a yellow ochre because the yellow ochre is similar in hue and similar in value, right, to the green. So would you say it's a little bit darker or a little bit lighter? It's a little bit lighter, right? The yellow and yellows in general are lighter than green. So I would start off with this, and then I would probably add a little bit of blue. You notice that when you're mixing dull colors, right? I can use 2 dull colors to mix a dull color, or I could use a bright color and a dull color. Here I'm mixing a bright color, and a dull color, right? So you actually need less if you know how to, if you start with the hue that's closest to the value of the desired color. Okay. So yeah, these are just some general things to keep in mind. And I'm just going to move these notes down. So just catching up with chat. How long have I been teaching? Oof. I think, so I started teaching in university when I started as a TA, and I started assisting with painting classes, with drawing classes, and actually with business, with a small business course. And so that's kind of how I got into teaching. At Wing Canvas started in 2013. We opened our doors in 2014. And so it's been 10 years at Wing Canvas specifically. But I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. Like I love learning, and I love sharing what I learn. So I think, and I like people. So that's kind of like the perfect job for me. Yeah, black paint is so strong, right? Like that's why, like, when I mix colors, I keep my black away from my white, like far away from my white, because it will really, just a little bit will contaminate everything. And even, you know what, even when I do like a kids workshop or something, I don't even put black on their plate. Like I just give them white and like one color at a time, because otherwise the whole plate or the whole palette turns into mush, right? Turns into like mud. Who supported me the most? I was very lucky to have a family of, I come from a family of artists. And I was very, very lucky to have grown up around classical art, painting. Like my grandfather is an artist, professional artist. My aunt is an artist. Just lots of artists in my family. And then I did chat with my parents about, they said, Faye, you'd make a really good doctor. And I'd be like, yeah, I know, but I just love art. And so they supported me through it all. But yeah, I'm very, very lucky. All right. And then talking about support, at Wing Canvas, we have an amazing team, better than I could have ever asked for. And it's definitely one of the best things about the business. It's just the people. Like, the people have been incredible. A lot of them started off as volunteers. They all found us, and we're all art nerds, and so it's just been amazing. And without the support, this channel wouldn't be where it is today. So we have editors, and Kevin helps us produce the videos and premiere them and schedule them all on YouTube, all the live streams. Joanne, one of our mods, also does our YouTube thumbnails. She's a designer, amazing designer, all of our teachers, and there's a lot of other people behind the scenes that support Winged Canvas, as well as our amazing patrons. So yeah, support us on Patreon, and you can also help support the channel. All right. The last thing, last tip I have for you, or the last don't, is don't forget context. Don't forget context. So, is it Photoshop you're using? No, I'm using Krita. I was a Photoshop user for like 15 years. And then I was like, wait, what? There's open source, free, free drawing software. I got to try it out. So we tried out MediBang for a while, and then Krita had more functions. I know it has like a steeper learning curve. So it's not as smooth as Photoshop, but it has all the functions, and it's great for animation. So I'm using Krita. And yeah, and I use an XP Pen 15.6 Pro as my tablet. Hey, Fallen Sky, you're new here. Nice, welcome in. Is Krita better? Is Krita better than Adobe? Well, it's free, so maybe that's why it's better. Yeah, it has a lot of pros and cons. Do I recommend Krita for 2D game art? Absolutely. I recommend it for animation and all kinds of digital art. If you want to learn Krita for animation, join Josh's streams. Josh typically streams on Sundays, but you can watch his live stream replays. He just did like a 5-part animation series, which is really cool. Okay, so don't forget context. So look up, I think I'm going to spell this wrong, Chevreul's rule. I'm just going to Google it to make sure I don't spell it wrong. Chevreul's rule of color. Chevreul's rule of color. So we actually did a stream recently. Jesse did a stream to explain Chevreul's rule of color. It's actually really interesting because it's all about color context. And so I definitely suggest you look it up or watch our video. But basically, the context is so important. And to summarize it, colors will appear differently depending on what's next to it. Colors will appear differently depending on what's next to it. So that means if I took a middle, like if I took a gray, right? Let's say I took a gray, and here I have a gray color, right? If I take the yellow, if I take a little bit of yellow and I put it inside that gray is going to appear a bit more purple because purple is the opposite color of yellow, right? And if I have the same gray and I choose like a bright green, right? Let's say I choose a bright green here, right? The gray is going to appear more red. Now you're probably looking at it and saying, it actually doesn't, it looks like gray. But depending on what's next to it, like this is not in context, right? But in a painting, it definitely, you'll definitely see it. And I'm gonna explain with the examples below, okay? So, before I move on to the Harry Potter example here, whoops, just give me a second. Let me just move these guys up. Oh, where is this guy? Oh, here he is. Okay. So you can see this is the same guy, right? But very, very different context. Very, very different context. So let's just take a swatch sample of his face and take a look at it. But first of all, I just want to show you guys what people have said in the comments, because I asked a question. What do you find the most challenging when mixing colors? And most of the comments here said that they have difficulty determining what colors look like in different lighting situations, okay, in different lighting conditions. And so I definitely think, you know, that's something that we could talk about. And then my final demo could be, you know, painting the same thing in a different context. Okay. Loki 16 said, I tend to have difficulty with colored lighting and picking palettes that aren't all roughly the same tonality. And then some digital artists saying, you know, not really issue with mixing colors, but because they use digital art, but more of an issue is color context. Like one moment I have a nice desaturated blue and then I put it over a vibrant color and it looks great. So these are all about color context, right? Even Spoofy, who said for digital art, some colors get way too high contrast compared to the rest, so it looks like none of them match together. So it's definitely something that most people struggle with, is like how to match the lighting, right? How do you draw the same character with different lighting? And this is definitely something that I struggled with personally. And so, and this person said mixing the same color more than once. I'll share some tips with that as well. But first of all, we're going to talk about context, okay, and kind of how that all works. So if we look at Harry here, and we're just going to take some samples of his skin tone. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I'm taking a mid-tone color. So I'm gonna, if I was to paint Harry, I would start off probably with, if I was doing it digitally or if I was painting him with acrylics, I would start off with like the mid-tones, right? So I would either tone my canvas and then I would start off by putting the mid-tones down in kind of like a flat way. So So his mid-tone skin tone is like this. This is what we think a typical skin tone looks like. It's this like peachy color, right? When we think default skin tone, that's what it is. And then the lights on his face, you can see the light parts of his face are maybe slightly more yellow, right? So the lighter you go, like for example, if I just took this skin tone and then I added white to the skin tone, it's not going to make this color. I have to add, when you add white to a color or you add black to a color, it actually cools the color. So white and black are both cool colors. So if I just added white to this skin tone color, it's not going to work because the white will cool the color significantly. So it would probably look more like you can see here, right, that this color is not very saturated, right? But if I actually just use white, it would be too cool. So I would have to warm it up with maybe like a touch of primary yellow. Okay. And then the darks, there aren't really that many shadows on his face, but I'm just going to find like a relatively darker shadow. Okay. So you can see that his skin tone is all like relatively warm. Kazu says, wait, how is white a cool color? So white, it's debatable whether white is a color at all. In my books, it definitely is. White is a cool color, 100%. You can get like a Naples white, a Naples yellow. A Naples yellow is kind of like a yellowy white. So it's like, I'm trying to find an equivalent of it. And it depends on the brand, but like a Naples yellow would be like something like this, right? So you can see it's already warmer, and it would definitely be helpful for skin tones. Like I really like Naples white for skin tones. Not sure if it's actually available in acrylics because I've never seen Naples white in acrylic. I've only seen it in oils. But yeah, if you don't warm up your whites, then they tend to look too cool. And I never actually use pure white in my paintings unless I'm highlighting stuff. This image here, yeah, this might look like it's pure white, but it's probably just overexposed and been on the internet, you know, copied and pasted over 100 times. So it's kind of lost a lot of detail. Okay, so this is like a relatively warm skin tone palette. And then let's look at something that's like really desaturated. So in this image, right, you can see that the mid-tone colors are probably about here, right? So we know that this color, which on white looks like a bluish gray, is that a color you would use for skin tone? Like, probably not, right? You probably never start with this color for a skin tone. And so if you really sit down and analyze how colors work in different contexts, you'll learn that it's not always what you expect. So, you know, the lighter skin tone is more of this like light gray, and then the really dark, like it gets really, really dark, but I'm going to choose like a color that's kind of in between because there's some reflected light, right? So the reflected light you can tell is kind of blue, right? It's like a lot more blue. And so this palette, you can see it has a lot more drama, right? Tons of drama, very desaturated, monochromatic color palette. So monochromatic is basically just one color and getting lighter and darker. Okay, so can you make skin tones work with blues? Absolutely. It all depends on the context. Okay, so now let's look at this one over here. You can see this one. He looks like he was cut out and put into this background. Harry doesn't look like he belongs in this background. This was probably a Photoshop poster, you know, where they took this image of him and they didn't really get the context right. They just kind of cut him out and put him in this scene here. Okay, so I want to show you how you would correct that. So where is he? Okay, he's here. So I'm just gonna clone him here. So what I would do here, if you're working digitally, right? There's not a lot of this blue that's in his face right now, right? His shirt is the blue because his shirt is actually more of like a white, and white will take on any color that's around it, right? So if his shirt was not blue, he would look like he sticks out, like he's a cardboard cutout on top of this background, right? So what I would do here, if I was working on the movie poster, I would hue shift it. So I would go Control U to change the hue. I'm just going to bring this window up here. And you can see digitally, you know, you can hue shift. So there's a couple ways you can do it. So first of all, I would probably decrease the saturation. Is this going to work? Yeah, I would probably decrease the saturation, right? A little bit. And then I would probably hue shift him to be a little bit more blue. So like in this cyan kind of color. So more like that, right? It's a very subtle difference. But at nighttime, and if you only had blue light, like if Harry was only lit by the light in his wand, right? And then maybe there's like the blue sky or like the blue nighttime moon or something, right? He's going to be very desaturated, very monochromatic. Like if you've ever taken a walk at nighttime, you can't tell what color the trees are. Like they could be yellow, they could be green, they could be red. You don't know. Like you just don't know because it's so dark, right? So, yeah, like you can definitely play around with that. So you can see I just adjusted the saturation and the hue, and he already looks like he belongs in the background. The other way you could do it is you could you could put a new layer on. So let's say you don't have him on a transparent background, right? So what you could do is if I created a new layer, I can just take this background color. So I'll take this like cyan color, and then I would fill it. And then I would probably go into my my layers here, and I would turn that into an overlay layer and probably like reduce the saturation just a little bit, or the opacity, right? So then you can kind of see it will adjust the color and provide more context for the background, right? So he looks closer to this, right? And you can see he's wearing a red shirt. So if this was Harry in the daytime, his shirt would be very red, right? It would be like in here. But because it's nighttime and because there's blue, it looks more of like a dark purple, like an alizarin crimson type of color. So it definitely, like, context is everything. Okay, so I'm just gonna undo what I did here. And continue to take color swatches. So let's see what his skin tone is. It's probably less saturated than the one beside it. So I'm just gonna take a mid-tone and take it from his nose. So here's my mid-tone. Look at that. Very desaturated. Very, very desaturated. And then my highlight, like a gray. It's like this greenish gray. You know, if this was like if you use this skin tone on a bright sunny day, you're painting a dead person. You're painting a corpse, right? So it all depends on the context. Do I have a dark? I'm gonna go under his nose here. Okay, so again, very monochromatic. And then the last one, so this lighting is a little bit more subtle. It's probably very similar to the one next to it, but probably hue shifted to be not a very neutral. So you can see this one's a very neutral gray, whereas we have a cool gray and a warm gray. This one is very neutral. And then the mid-tones are a little bit warmer. Sorry, the shadows are a little bit warmer. It looks warmer, but I put it down and it's like cooler. Probably warmer, maybe warmer on this side. Yeah, it's a little warmer on this side. Okay. It's like, wait. Okay, and then the light, like the light part is very cool. Okay. So these are different types of palettes that you can use. And I think it's really interesting to kind of study stuff like this because, you know, if you really want to learn context, right? This is really how you do it. Just gonna remove my Naples yellow example here. But we all have a default, right? So this is like your default skin tone. So sunny and bright. So you feel like you've gotten better at color picking just by watching the stream. I'm so glad. I'm glad that it helps. Kazu says, I think it also works for underwater. Absolutely, works for underwater. So I think that starting with your background color is really the best thing you can do for mixing colors. So if you're starting on a white canvas, every color is going to appear too dark. Why? Because the canvas is white, right? Unless you're painting somebody and they're standing on a white background, okay, that's fine. But usually speaking, there's context. There's a background behind all of these, right? So if you paint the background first, you have your context, right? If you paint your background first, and most people don't, most people start on white, and it's just like, you know, it's better if you start on white or you start with like a middle gray even, right? But most people will paint their character first and not their background first. And so I should actually add that. It would be under context. Whoops. I think I turned that layer off. Here we go, context. I'm gonna add one thing here and move my Harry's down. Oh no! Oh no, I did something funky with the layers. Okay, tone the canvas, or start with your background. Start with your background. Just want to make sure I'm drawing on the right layer here. Whoops. Start by drawing on the right layer. Yeah, I should have named these. Which one? Where did it go? Ah, here. Okay. Here. Okay. Don't forget context. So start with your background. Start with your background color. So basically, if you know that your background color is going to be like, it's going to be cool, right? Then put that in. Or if you know that your background color is going to be, you know, warm or bright, you know, those are the things that you want to put in, because it's going to give you enough information to make sure that the rest of your artwork looks pretty decent. Okay, so starting with your background is another one of those things that can really help you improve. So I was gonna change the skin tone of my little avatar here. So that's why I have her here. So I'm just gonna put her on a new layer. If you have a gray sketchbook, yeah, gray sketchbooks are great. Gray sketchbooks are really, really nice. Because you can get your midtones in really, really quick, right? Okay, so everybody has a default. So what I mean by default is if I say, what is a skin tone color? Your brain goes to like, okay, it's an orangey kind of color and it's like somewhere in here. Maybe it's a little pinker. Maybe I need to like bring it up. It's like somewhere in here. Okay, that's your default. And so we always just choose our default color, and sometimes it works, you know, if you're going with a default background like white or like a light blue or like a daytime, you know, background. But even if you're using like a light blue, you would have to put blues like if you were using like a light blue background, you would need to put light blues on Harry's shirt. Okay, because white will kind of reflect all the colors around him. So if Harry was standing in a green field, his shirt would have greens in it. His shirt would not be white. It would be like a light green, but it would look white. It would look white even though it's not white. So I hope you know what that, like, you can understand what that means. So like, for example, his shirt here is white, but it's not white, it's blue, but you see it as white, right? Or you see it as like a gray color. Here, his shirt could be like a light gray or a light blue or something, right? But you would probably, if I said to you, oh, he's wearing a white shirt, you'd be like, yeah, he is wearing a white shirt, right? So we all have like a default. And so you want to get away from that default, right? You want to remind your brain to not default to certain things. That's how you can avoid things like same face syndrome, right? That's how you can avoid all kinds of issues when it comes to mixing paint. Okay. All right, so for this one, like, this one is very monochromatic, right? Dramatic, desaturated. So if you're going for something very moody, right? If I was painting Harry in a blue background, I would definitely start by putting in the background and then painting a skin tone based on that background color. Okay, so if you have trouble with this, then you can, first of all, watch Jesse's stream on the Chevreul's rule of color, and also practice, right? Just do what I did. Choose, you know, a famous person who's been in films, very dramatic ones, like study their lighting, try to paint it, right? Obviously, like, maybe not his face in full detail, but just like try to paint. Even if you paint like a Kirby or like a Princess Peach or something, like start with something really simple and try to adjust the skin tone. Okay, So this one here, is warmer. So it's also fairly monochromatic, but I would say it's a warm, like warm grays. Okay, so how would you mix this? So this would probably be like I would say I could start off with like a burnt umber, maybe even a raw umber. Raw umber is a little bit more green, but I would probably start off with an umber, right? Like a burnt umber, and then add white to it to mix the warm grays. Like this is more of an umber, so it would be your earth tones. Okay. For the monochromatic, it would basically be this color. So like a blue plus black and white. Right, this would probably be a burnt sienna. And what else? Okay, so this one here, so this one's very interesting because in this example, you have cools and warms, right? So warm shadows and cool highlights. So for warm shadows and cool highlights, sometimes it's really fun to use a relatively monochromatic palette. So if you look at this gray here in the middle, like it's pretty much fully desaturated, right? If I look on the histogram here, this actually appears a little bit, it sits on the same, like pretty much on the same scale of being desaturated, but it looks a little bit more red, right? Because the red is actually a pretty dark color, right? So if you're over here, like this value is very close to this value, whereas red, right, is not close to the lighter values, which is why the gray appears more red, because it's more similar in value. So there are all these like little subtle things that you learn about color when you really study it. And then the cool colors, right? You can see this is in the blues, in the blue ranges, right? So having warm and cool colors in the same skin tone palette is a lot of fun because it's a way to add more depth and more dimension and like different types of lighting. So usually speaking, okay, usually highlights are warm and shadows are cool, usually, right? Like if you think about somebody standing under the sun, right? Or on like a sunny day. When you think of a highlight, you don't really think of it as a cool highlight. A default highlight, at least for me, is a warm color. And then the shadows, I always default to a cool. But this one is interesting because it's the opposite. Okay, so hopefully that was interesting and it made sense. But this one would be, whoops. This one would be warm and cool. Warm and cool neutrals. Okay, so depending on the mood and depending on, you know, what you're going for, you can definitely think about your context first. Okay, so I'm gonna demo this digitally, and then if we have time, I can show you what it would look like traditionally. Let me know in the chat. Do you guys want to see traditional mixing or do you want to see digital mixing? Most of the subscribers on our channel are digital, but I'm a traditional artist, so let me know. Digital mixing, digital traditional. Well, I guess you're gonna get a little bit of both. You kind of got the digital mixing. You want to see both? You want to see some traditional? Okay. Okay. Sure, sure. Let's do some traditional. You personally have a harder time in digital. Okay. So digital mixing, like, there's really not a lot of color mixing in digital. I mean, you can use transparent layers, I suppose, but traditional is definitely harder. Like digital mixing is fairly easy, but I was gonna take my avatar and just kind of like recreate these different skin tones to kind of show you how I would do it. So let me just set myself up here. So with Krita, you can't just like, you know, alt and click and drag. You actually have to paste it into the active layer, which is very annoying. Tell me if there's a better way to do this. Okay. So all of these rules, whether I'm demonstrating it traditionally or digitally, it's like the same. It applies to both. It's just that the color wheels are different. So with digital, you're actually using an additive color wheel, whereas with traditional, you're using a subtractive color wheel. So what that means is with digital, you're painting with light, and with traditional, you are painting with pigment, right? So when light adds together, it gets lighter, whereas when pigments add together, it gets darker. So that's kind of what I mean. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use my Harry Potters as an example and show you guys what how I would actually approach the color shifting. Okay, so my default is this one. It's me wearing a green shirt, right? So I'm not going to change that one, but I will sort of choose a did I create this background layer? Sorry, I just want to make sure that oh, okay. I have too many background layers. So I'm going to call this context. Okay. So for the background, so let's say the first background is going to be this like bluish color. Okay. So I'm going to use a really big brush and just kind of put this blue color behind me. Okay. So if I wanted my skin tone to look more like this color, then I would have to adjust this. I would have to adjust this avatar to be more of this blue. So hold on a second. So what I can do is I can, like, you know, I'm still on this blue. I can use a layer on top. So I'm just going to call this adjustment layer. I'm going to move it on top of the avatar, and I'm going to change that layer from normal to color. And you can see, like, when I do this, it just shifts everything to blue, right? But what I can do is just kind of lower the opacity a little bit, right? So somewhere around 50%. This is so easy. This feels like it's cheating. Oh, Jaw Redstone guy, thanks for the tip. Control C and Control V. Yeah, that does work, but it could have pasted it in a separate layer, and I wanted it to paste in the same layer, in the single layer. Control Alt J to copy to a new layer. Sure, I would love those shortcuts in Discord. That'd be awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the first one, pretty simple, right? You can pretty much do this for all of them. So for example, for the warm grays, let's try, you know, this cyan like background color. So it's like more of a cyan color. But let's say I want to adjust the avatar so that it feels desaturated, but like has these umber or earth tones to it. Then for my adjustment layer, what I could do is just use like this, like an umbery tone, and you know, just paint it on. So it's very subtle. It doesn't change a lot. I would probably, you know what, I would probably leave the hair, because hair is like a black color, right? So it probably will retain some of that blue instead of this umbery color. Okay. Pretty easy so far. Like, it's so easy with digital that I feel like it's almost like cheating, but it's not. Got to use your digital tools when you can, right? Okay, so then for the last one is probably the trickiest because the lighting is a little bit different. So I would use the blue. All of these backgrounds are blue. It's funny. Okay, so blue background. And then if I wanted to add bounce light to this, I would probably create a new adjustment layer. And I would bring in some of these blues, right? So if I wanted to use these cool, like cooler highlights, and I turn this into color, I can probably put in some of these like bluer tones on one side. Right, like it depends on how rendered you really want to get with this. Like maybe it's just half of her face, right? Maybe like this side. I mean, this is me. I'm not saying her, but it's actually me. And then the other side has like warmer shadows, right? So for the warmer shadows, I could probably go in and just, you know, it's warm, but it's still cool compared to the other stuff that you see, right? So I might like what I'm saying is it's cooler than the original, even though it's warmer compared to the black, or warmer compared to the blues. Sorry. So for the ear, you can see how gray that ear actually looks. So typically speaking, I would leave the ear sort of more red. because if you make the ear too blue, like ears are naturally more transparent, so they appear more red. So like your noses, your nostrils, your fingertips appear more red, right? But like basically this is how I would do it to adjust for color context. So yeah, we do have time to do some traditional stuff. So let me know in the chat what colors you struggle to mix. What colors do you struggle to mix? And we can attempt to do some of that. Oh, and by the way, if you don't already know, we have a really great community on Discord, and definitely join our Discord because we share all of our files from our streams. There's lots of amazing people on there sharing their artwork, giving critiques, and we also have office hours. So if you are a Patreon member or a YouTube member, at the VIP tier, you can get live critique. So we do a live critique once a week with different creators. So I just had mine yesterday. And the couple of you here, like Jaw Redstone guy, we were in the same critique. You know, it's a lot of fun because you can get personalized critique on your artwork. And it's definitely worth it if you are studying art on your own and you're, you know, you don't have time for a regular class. But otherwise, we do weekly classes, and summer is here, so we are doing summer intensives. So I am teaching a figure drawing intensive in August. It is fully asynchronous except for a live critique on day 5. And followed by online critiques, personalized feedback, and draw overs on your work every single day. So definitely check that out. All right. Now let's move on to traditional. Okay, so you guys say you have a hard time mixing skin tones. Yeah, it boils down to values. Like, I can still show you how to mix some skin tones, but let me know if there's any other color that you would like to see me mix. I think I want to show green because green is just like one of those colors that a lot of people have trouble mixing, and I don't actually even own greens anymore, like except for those big tubes that I'll never use. I don't think I'll ever buy green unless I'm doing like a neon green background, or just like a very particular bright green. That's when I would use it. Otherwise, I wouldn't really bother getting any greens. So you can see how big that color wheel was. This is my little canvas to do my demo on. So this is like an 8x10. And my other canvas was an 18x24. So very, very, very big and very labor intensive. If you want to get better at darker skin tones, check out my last stream. I did a stream just on mixing skin tones. And I happened to paint Lupita Nyong'o, and she has darker skin tones. So definitely check that out, because we just covered it. Okay, so let me show you why white and black are cool colors, okay? So the colors I'll be using today, just gonna make sure that this stays. Okay, so I'm using ivory black and titanium white. So for a long time in my life, I didn't use black. I was like, I don't believe in black. I think we can mix black. It's richer, da 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 da. But I discovered that I actually love black. It's a very useful color. And I I think that I could get away with not using black if I was using oils, but with acrylics, I find it's really hard to get a nice, rich, dark pigment. So with oils, how I would mix black if I didn't have it is I would use two opposite transparent colors. Now this works with every combination except for yellow, because yellow is very light. So I would mix, for example, ultramarine blue and burnt umber. If those are both transparent, dark colors, one is a blue, one is an orange, right? Because burnt umber is just like a dark orange. So if I used like a blue and a brown in acrylic, it doesn't do this. It's not the same. It just really isn't, because there's something about acrylic paints that does not have the richness. I think it's like the plastic binder instead of the oil binder. So you can get a nice rich black by using ultramarine and burnt umber. You can also get a really nice black by using like a viridian or like a very rich green and alizarin crimson. So like a red and a green transparent color, dark transparent color. Okay, but you know, why mix black when black is like a super accessible and cheap color? So why did I take these out? Oh, I wanted to also talk about greens. So let's see here. Do you guys want to see oils or acrylics? Oils or acrylics. I also have gouache. I could also use gouache. So whatever, tell me what you guys want to see. Because they're different properties, right? Acrylics are like, I would use slightly different colors with acrylic than I do with oils. Acrylic, gouache. Ooh, can you do gouache? Oh, lots of people want to do gouache. Okay, so I've got 3 people saying gouache, 3 people saying acrylic. We need some tiebreakers here. If you're in the chat, let me know. Both. All right, guys, I started a poll. It's just a little bit easier. What paint do you want to see me use? You can only vote for one, okay? Let's go. Let me get my gouache set out. Okay, gouache is winning. Gouache is winning, guys. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, gouache is just a an opaque watercolor. Okay, watercolor, like if you have a white in your watercolor set, that's gouache. That's not watercolor. Technically, gouache are watercolors, but they're opaque watercolors. Okay, so you can use acrylic. You can use gouache with watercolor in tandem. Okay, so gouache won the poll by 67%. So we're gonna use gouache. You guys surprised me. I had all my oils and all my acrylics out. I did not have my gouache set out. So I will just need a moment to grab some paper instead of canvas. Okay, I think I found some mixed media paper. Paints are flying everywhere. I'm just going to tape my paper down because otherwise it's going to get very unmanageable. So if you're using watercolor or you're using gouache to paint stuff, you definitely need to tape it down because otherwise the water will make the paper buckle. So when I went to design school, I had to use gouache a lot, and I hated it. First of all, Winsor Newton gouache was very expensive, and gouache dries a different color. So when it's wet, it dries differently. And so it was so frustrating. Like mixing a grayscale with gouache is probably the most frustrating pigment. Because it, like I said, it dries a different color. So your color wheel is just like so challenging to do. So what I had to do to make a perfect color wheel with gouache is mix a whole bunch of different swatches of gray and then cut them out after they were dry and place them next to each other and pick the grays that made that perfect grayscale. So yeah, there you go. It was a chore. Okay. So I want to show you some interesting palettes, okay? So in this gouache set, so this is a set, it was about $70 Canadian, and I got it maybe 2 years ago, so expect it to be about, like these tubes are probably about 10 bucks each, maybe like $7 each, $7 to $8. I'm in Canada, so depending where you are. When I was going to school, I remember I bought a gouache, I think it was emerald green. I don't know why I bought emerald green, but it was a series 4. And the higher the number in the series, the more expensive it is. So emerald green had this like crazy pigment in it that was like very expensive. So one tube of emerald green cost me $25. Look at the size of these tubes, like $25. Okay, so yeah, don't ever buy greens. I can try to mix an emerald green actually and see if that works. But I'll list out the colors here. Okay, so in this set there is a white, which is almost done. White, I have a white and a black. Okay, and then my primary. So you'll notice that in this set there are 2 blues, 3 yellows, 2 reds, and 1 green. Okay, I feel like they felt like they needed to include a green, but like I don't really use this. So okay, so the 3 yellows, if you want a reference for gouache, is this one is the primary yellow. So primary yellow, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow light, all the same, very similar. This one is a permanent yellow deep. So permanent yellow deep, you can see it has more reds in it, right? So it's slightly warmer. So you might think, oh, yellow is a cool, like how can yellow be a cool color? Because yellow is technically a warm color. But if I compare these 2 yellows, you can see this one is quite cool, right? Compared to this one. So cool would be, it borders, it's closer to green, right? Green, speaking of context, would you say green is a cool or warm color? Let me know in the chat. Is green a cool or warm color? Kai says both. Cool. Warm, cool. Okay. Green is green. So whoever said both, you're right. And whoever said cool, you're also right. So green, just by itself, if you look at just the color wheel, green is on the cool side. Okay, so the cool colors are like green, blue, and purple, right? Those are the three sort of cool colors. But if I put green next to blue, right? If I put green next to blue, green is warmer than blue because green has yellow in it, right? So it depends on the context. It's all about context, guys. So, okay. The other color is my yellow ochre. I love yellow ochre, love this color. You can also get like a raw sienna or like a yellow oxide. It's very similar, but it's this earth tone yellow that I just love so much. It's great for, you know, your more natural colors. And then here is the two reds. So I've got a primary red, which is closer to magenta. So this red is cooler. And then I've got a spectrum red. So the spectrum red is more orangey. So this one is warmer and this one is cooler, even though red is technically a warm color. So I've got my cool and my warm reds. I've got my cool and my warm yellows. And then I've got a darker yellow, like an earth tone. Okay. I wish they included a brown in this set, but they didn't. Like, I would have much rather had a brown than a green. Because brown is kind of annoying to mix, right? So I've got ultramarine, blue, and primary blue. So my primary blue is closer to cyan, which is greener. And my ultramarine blue is closer to red or to purple, right? So ultramarine has red in it, or magenta, I should say. Whereas the primary blue is more of like a cyan, and you can't technically mix cyan. So that's why it's a primary color. And then the green, I've actually never looked at it. It's permanent green middle. Permanent green middle. I've only used it to paint landscapes because I had so much of it. But yeah, I don't think we really need greens. Okay, so I'm gonna take out my essential colors and then we'll try adding to them. So I got my white. I have my black, and I'm going to keep my white and my black pretty far from each other. And then I'm going to take out my primaries. Here's my primary yellow, my primary red, and my primary blue. So you'll notice that I put them in a particular order, going from lightest to darkest. Okay, so with all these colors, with these specific primaries, I should be able to mix any color. Okay. Yeah, I don't really know the name. So if you are gonna buy a green, like the greens that I actually own are, I own a neon green, I own a bright green. I can't remember why I have a bright green. It looks like this. It's an old paint from the studio. I don't know why we bought it. But it's not used. It's very full. So yeah, I like Hooker's green. I really like Hooker's green. I like Viridian for oils because I just like how you can glaze with it. It's like a transparent green, and transparent green is useful when you want to shift your colors, right? It's kind of like adding a like a layer, like an adjustment layer digitally. You know, when you do like an overlay. If you use transparent colors, that's kind of how you would do it traditionally. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of green. Okay, so if I wanted to mix this green, like this bright green here, okay? Say I want to mix this green. You know, what color would you start with? Would you start with your yellow or would you start with your blue? Kevin says, we expect to use so much green because of nature. Yeah, but not this green. Kai says yellow. What do you guys think? You start with yellow. Jaw Red, some guy says blue. Dazzling Action says yellow. Okay. So in this case, yellow is a lot weaker than blue, right? So it depends on how much I'm mixing. So if I'm just mixing like a swatch or something, right, I would probably start off with my yellow, right? And then I would look at how much blue I'm actually using, just like a little tiny bit. So I'm using the two brightest colors that I have to get this green. Right, so you have to be very, very careful when you are mixing or tinting light colors, because they just can change so quickly. Okay, so I have too much water on my brush. Let's try this again. See, when I add blue like that, it just consumes my yellow. Okay, so you can see that this green is slightly warmer than this one, right? Watch what happens when I add white to this green. So if I added white, and when I mix similar colors, I try to mix them together, like next to each other. Can you see how this green is kind of cool, right? It's a lot cooler. So it's a lot cooler, but if I wanted to keep the intensity of the green, I would just add more yellow to it. Right, so if I lighten it up, and this is like what happens when, let's say you're painting, something natural and you have a green and then you add white to it to lighten it up, and then what happens to it? It doesn't look natural anymore, right? Like this doesn't look natural. This looks somewhat natural, right? So the more white that you add to a color that already has yellow in it, you have to add more yellow to adjust for it. So this one is slightly lighter than that. You can kind of see it already. Like I mix similar colors right next to each other on my palette for context, right? Back to the context thing again, right? Context is so, so important. And it's something that we always forget about. Okay, so it's more of an apple green. Yeah, if I wanted to mix this green, which is very unnatural, I would put more of this blue into it. So you can kind of see if I go right next to it. And it looks like that green that I have is slightly cooler, so I would add a little bit of white. Okay, so there's my greens. So I want to show you a really cool way of mixing greens, though. Okay, so there's a really nice green that you can get with black. And yellow. So in this case, I should have started with my yellow first. So if I take my yellow here, just gonna move this up. Okay, so if I take my yellow, so here's a really, really bright yellow, right? And then if I tint it with black, next to the green, it doesn't look very green, right? It doesn't look very green, but it actually makes a beautiful green. So I'm going to paint this green next to it. It's funny because on camera it doesn't look very green, but it looks really green on my paper. So this green may not look very natural. Sorry, it may not look very bright, but it's very natural. So I think I need more yellow. I think I had one of those like mind-blowing moments when my color theory teacher, or I think it was my painting teacher, was like, you don't need blue to mix green. And my head exploded. I was like, what? I've been lied to this entire time? Throughout elementary school, I've been lied to. I thought you can't, I thought you know, secondary colors are mixed with primary colors. Okay, so those are two shades of green. You can see that they were mixed with black, right? Not with blue. But here's how to make it look more green. If I took the opposite color, so let's say I took a red and I put this red right next to the green. Right now look at that. That looks a lot more green, right? And typically if you're using a really saturated red like this and you're trying to do like a complementary palette, you don't want to use like both super bright colors, because then it kind of looks like Christmas, or it just looks like an eyesore. It's a little bit of eye strain that you get there. So I recommend using like a saturated, if you're going to use opposite colors or a complementary palette, make one color lighter and the other one darker, or the other one duller. So make one color more saturated and then the other color less saturated. Or you can use more of one color and less of the other color. So however you want to work out those ratios, like let's say your composition is 80% this red and then like 20% this green. Okay, it might work. It might not be as much of an eyesore as if you use 50% of this and 50% of that, right? But if you use 50% of this red and 50% of, you know, this column of green, it's a lot more natural. Or just looks more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, so now look at that green. So before, this green looked quite a bit duller than this green did, right? This green looked quite a bit duller than this green, but now they almost look like the same green. Like once I put that red on there, it makes this green look so much more green. Pretty cool. pretty cool if you ask me. Colors are really cool. Like, all right. So I mixed some red, I made some green. We don't have too much time on this stream, but why don't I show you some of my gouache artwork, and then I can tell you how to actually how like my approach for mixing them. Some of these would include class demos, and some of them would just be like, you know, random plein air things that I painted. So this piece was a color experiment. And yeah, I know we're approaching 5 o'clock, but I started late and I'm hoping to cover a bit more things. But if you if you want to see me mix a particular color, please let me know. Okay, so this was actually we actually have a video that features this demo. So if you click on our playlist, our color theory playlist, I think this piece was in one that was like called CMYK versus RGB or something, or understanding HSV in color, so hue, saturation, value. And so this painting, what I did was I on purpose used a really bright color that you would never normally see, right? And I made this purple thing, this purple building, which was like actually a desaturated brown, but I just pumped up one of the colors while maintaining the value, and I used a analogous color scheme. So analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So I've got like a light green, you know, like greens here, purples and blues. Okay, so this is analogous, and this was done with gouache with the exact same set that I showed you. And I believe you can see like how bright those purples look, right? I don't have a purple. I mixed that purple using my primary blue and my primary red. I might have used ultramarine actually to get this purple, which is why I recommend getting 2 primaries, like a cooler one and a warmer one. This was a color wheel that I did for the same painting class. It's my painting mentorship class. And you can see that it's, you know, in my class, I painted a color wheel with, you know, your primary, secondary, tertiary colors. If you haven't done this before, it's a really, really good exercise. It's not the most fun. It's kind of boring, but you learn so much from doing this. So this was like a hue, saturation, and value scale. So sort of like your digital, you know, color wheel thing, right? The saturation goes from left to right, your value goes from up to, you know, up and down, and then your hue is sort of around that triangle, right? So practice mixing both. So I used a red and a black to do the saturation one, and then for the values the same thing. But you can see, like, look at how purple that red becomes when I add white to it, right? Like if I wanted to capture that the intensity of this red, I would have to add yellow to the red. So yeah, Winsor Newton gouache is so pigmented. It looks so good. So if you compare it with like these reds, for example, okay, you could see that if I started off with this red, I had to mix yellow into all of these steps in order to maintain the integrity of the red. Otherwise, it starts doing this. It starts going this way, right? It starts getting cooler. Same thing with the blues. It would start, or the greens. The greens would start getting cooler. Okay, so it affects all of those colors. Did I use tape? Yes. Yes, I did. Not for this, but for these. So, believe it or not, I did not use green for this painting. There is 0 green in this painting. If your brain just exploded, welcome to to being an art nerd and realizing that you do not need blue to mix greens. This is a Zorn palette. I am like obsessed with the Zorn palette, so I have a few videos on it. You can Google it and find. I have a skin tone tutorial where I painted Oprah in the Zorn palette. But basically, these greens were mixed with these exact colors. So it was black and my primary yellow. Okay, no greens, just color context. Yes, I am a color wizard. I love that term. Oh, this is the Oprah painting. This was also done with the Zorn palette with gouache. So I think this entire book is done with gouache and watercolor. But you can see, like, you can get very, very realistic skin tones by just using red, yellow. It's red, yellow, black, and white. While we're talking about the Zorn palette, why don't I show you what it looks like? This was, I think this was oils. Yeah, this is definitely oils because you could see like the white kind of having that oil stain there. Right? So this is the Zorn palette. It's basically white, yellow, red, and black. Which yellows and which reds do you say? It doesn't really matter. You can experiment. Basically, if you use a primary red and a primary yellow, you have the largest range of color. Okay, let's say that your red is like a cadmium red, which has yellow in it. And let's say you're using a yellow that's like duller. So in other words, if you are using the primaries, you have the widest range of color. And if you're using a red and a yellow that have similar, like if you're using a red that has yellows in it and a yellow that has reds in it, right, you're going to get a slightly less range with your colors. Okay, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it's a yellow and a red, you can use the Zorn palette. But you can see like the purple of the Zorn palette is just a dark red, but in context of everything, right, it still looks purple. This is a gray, right? But like our eyes can trick us and think, oh, well, this is red, so that must be green. Right? So if you look at this side of the color wheel where all the blues are, it's actually just grays. But it makes a wonderful, wonderful skin palette. These are some color balls that I painted in an art mentorship class. We were studying portraiture. This was done with oils, and you can see like the different skin tones. Here's a lighter one. Here's a more, slightly more olive. This one's a darker skin tone. And this one's just like crazy colors. But basically, we translated that into some studies of like eyes and of a face, right? And you can see this skin tone is, it's got like the cool on one side and warm on the other side, which gives it dimension without too much of a value shift, which is really cool. This one I didn't actually finish yet, but this one is, was the reference for this was like a guy being lit by neon lights. And so this part of him was blue, but I just painted it with black. But lots of cool things you can do with limited color palettes. If you want to learn more about limited color palettes, comment on this stream. Let us know. We love feedback from our community, and we love making different videos on different topics based on what you choose. So these are just some random landscapes here. This one was just a beach scene that I did in like 15 minutes. I remember it was a very, very sandy day, and I got sand everywhere. Everything was blowing everywhere in my face, and it was just not a good experience. But I used two colors, just two colors. I used yellow ochre and ultramarine blue. So you can see the greens that you can get with just these two colors. And then I believe I also had white and black. So white and black, yellow ochre, ultramarine blue is a very nice limited palette that you can use for landscapes. Here's another one. So you can see like these blues are more towards the primaries, like more green and cyan, right? I had more time for this beach scene, but you can see like they're both blue and yellow, but like very different hues. So I love plein air painting. So I did these last year. I got to go to some industrial areas. I was traveling with my partner, and just like he was working, and I was painting. I was like tagging along and painting whatever I could see. So some of these are really quick. This is an illustration that I haven't finished yet. But yeah, you have a good sense of kind of how I work with gouache. But if you have any other color, any other questions about color, let me know. I know we didn't get super far with the traditional mixing, but I think I covered most of what I wanted to talk about. Let's see. I do want to show you one more thing. I want to show you guys the difference between burnt umber and raw umber and black. This is like one of the things that, and I'm going to be using acrylic. Okay, so these are acrylic gouache. It's by Liquitex. I just want to show you one last thing because I talk about browns, but I haven't really showed you how to use them with white, and I think it's worth learning. Just gonna check the chat. How is brown just dark orange? Yeah, brown. Here, let me show you on my massive color wheel here. Okay, so your browns are pretty much in this range, right? So anywhere from yellow, if you bring yellow all the way down to your brown, and your red all the way down to like a dark red. So your brown is usually in this range, right? If I had to tell you like what was the hardest strip to mix, it was probably the yellow. Like going from this, like this strip was probably the hardest. So from my yellow to my red. So if you want to try, you know, turning your yellow or turning like maybe not like a primary yellow, but more of a golden yellow and turning it into a brown, right? By just using the primary colors, that would be very tricky to do and a good exercise. But yeah, or yellow is like brown is just a desaturated and darker version of your yellow and orange. Not necessarily desaturated, like some browns are very saturated, it's just darker. Have you found a black that does not dilute into a blue or purple? It doesn't really dilute to a blue or purple. It just looks that way because of context. Like ultimately it comes down to context. So, sorry, Joe, I'm just gonna go over a little bit, but I think this is important. We're just gonna go over time a little bit. So this is gouache. And I'm gonna do the acrylics over here, okay? So, first thing I want to show you guys is brown. And as much as I like these colors, I don't like the dispenser. It always gets clogged. Okay, so I'm just going to use my palette knife. I know Josh also really likes acrylic gouache. It's like acrylic, but it looks like gouache. You get the best of both worlds. Okay, so I'm just gonna get a new section of my palette here. Okay, so the color I just took out is burnt umber. Okay, so burnt umber is closer to orange. And I want to show you what it looks like compared to a raw umber. So both of these are Liquitex. These ones, this is a medium viscosity, concentrated bottle of Liquitex. You might think, oh my gosh, Faye, it's such a small bottle. How did it last you like 20 years? Well, because it's very pigmented. And when you're using like concentrated acrylics, they go a long way. Okay, so side by side, they look very similar, but you really only start to see the difference when you start adding white to them. Okay, so let me show you. So we're gonna just use the colors on its own first. I like both of these browns. So if you're gonna get two browns, get burnt umber and raw umber. Both very cheap, Series 1 earth tones. Okay, so there's my burnt umber. Jaw Redstone guy, it might just be the quality of my paints, but whenever I paint with black, it turns into a deep navy blue or a desaturated purple. Yeah, it could just be your paints. So I know like there's different types of black too. There's like ivory black and Mars black and bone black. Bone black and ivory black are the same. They're both made with bones. There's carbon black, which I think is also the same. But yeah, it really depends, and it's turning into blue and the desaturated purple because it's cooler when you add white to it, right? It gets even cooler. Can black be cooler? Yes, right? Because black turns into gray when you add white to it, and gray can be warm or cool. Okay, so here's my burnt umber and here's my raw umber. Just gonna label them. Okay, so I still have raw umber on my brush. I'm gonna take out some white. I bet you it's clogged. So let's just go to the good old reliable palette knife. So if you're using like really good quality paints, it's okay to just use a little bit, right? Aside from white, which is like the color you would use the most. If you're gonna stock up on any color, stock up on white and stock up on your primary yellow because those are the colors that are gonna go the fastest. Okay. So now that I have the white, I'm gonna show you how these colors change when you add white to them, okay? So you can see that the raw umber makes like a really nice gray, right? You can see how much color is lost when you add white to it. Now I'm going to add the white to the burnt umber. So both of these colors are fairly transparent, and there might be some pigments that are more transparent than others. So like, for example, you can get transparent burnt umber and you can get burnt umber. Okay, so you see the difference? So one is warmer and one is cooler. So if you're painting something, like if you're painting a black and white portrait, let's say, it's almost better to use raw umber to paint it than it is to use black. So I'm gonna go one shade lighter, so you can see like the more white you add to it, the less saturated it becomes. So black, in other words, black and white are both colors that will desaturate and cool your other colors. So what I mean is, like, for example, instead of using a black to darken a color, you might want to use a brown, because the brown already has yellow in it, right? So it's not going to darken it and cool it. It's going to darken it and warm it. Okay, so look at it now. Like, look at raw umber. It looks like a very neutral gray. Yeah, the saturation went down really, really quickly. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same thing with the burnt umber. Just trying to match the values. So another thing you can do if you're having trouble with values is you can use a palette that's gray. You can also use a sheet of toned paper underneath clear plastic or underneath glass. Or if you really, really want to be nerdy about it, you can paint a grayscale and put it underneath a glass palette. So I don't know if you can see the difference. One is slightly warmer, one is slightly cooler. Right? You can kind of see the difference now. Okay, so raw umber, when raw umber mixes with white, it looks more like a middle gray. Like, it looks like a warmer gray. So sometimes if I paint like a black and white painting, I will do, instead of black and white, I'll do raw umber and white, and it makes a really nice, like, it's not quite sepia, like not really sepia, but it's like a warmer gray than you would typically find. So now I'm gonna do this with black. And I'm going to put the black next to the raw umber. Now I painted the black at the top there because black is actually darker in value, so I didn't put it right next to the umbers because it wouldn't be true to the value. So I have to add some white to this black to actually get the same value as the other pigments. So when you're working with colors and mixing colors, you want to focus on your values and your context, right? More so than like, what hue am I using? I mean, like, the hue is important. Don't get me wrong, it's important, but we don't focus enough on the values. Who says they're jealous of my black? Are you jealous of my black? You can get yourself some. It's just the Liquitex Acrylic Gouache Ivory Black. I do really like the acrylic gouache. But you can see here, I'm really trying to match the values, and you can see once this dries a little bit, like that looks too light and that looks too dark. But yeah, if you're interested in learning more about color, like just try this exercise. It's a lot of fun. It can be a lot of fun. If you're painting like a humongous one like I did with 15 shades or 13 shades of gray plus black and white, not as fun, but otherwise it can be kind of fun. If you're in the mood to nerd out to color and like try some new pigments. So if you look at these three colors next to each other, okay, so there's black, my raw umber, and my burnt umber, right? You can see that it almost looks like red, yellow, and blue. Right? There is no yellow, red, or blue in any of these colors. Well, that's not true. There's some red in burnt umber, and some red in raw umber as well. But there's no blue in raw umber, and there's, you know, it's mostly like an orangey, right? So it's like red and yellow, right? But more yellow, less red. This has more red and less yellow. And so like you can see the difference when you lighten that up. Looks pretty cool. So this burnt umber is really bothering me because it's not the right value. So I'm gonna fix that. So if you notice that your values are off, like once your color's dry and you squint at it, you want these steps to be very even. So just gonna go over that one more time. So yeah, if you like acrylic and you like gouache, try acrylic gouache. You get the best of both worlds. You get like the texture of gouache. Like when these two dries, like they look very similar, right? Except the acrylic, you can paint over it, you can sand it, you can paint over it without sort of bringing up the colors underneath, right? Because once it's dry, it's basically plastic, whereas gouache is like a powder. So if I went over this, like I tried to fix that, right, and it left a watermark, like that wouldn't happen if you're using acrylic. So yeah, I definitely think like experiment with your midtones. Experiment by mixing your values, try out different browns, try out different colors by adding white to them. And see where it takes you. Was there anything else? The last thing I wanted to show you are my two types of blues that I recommend. So I kind of wanted to show you the difference between warm colors and cool colors within pigments, like within these types of paints. So subtractive colors specifically, but I probably don't have time to show you all of them, so I'm just going to show you blue. So the two blues that I really like. One is phthalo blue and the other one is ultramarine. So I have a gouache ultramarine. I don't have a gouache phthalo blue because my set came with the primary blue, which is not quite phthalo blue. It's kind of in the middle of phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. So here's my ultramarine blue. Oh, and by the way, if you're using gouache and you want more room on your palette, you can dip your paper in some water and just remove it. Look at that, you have fresh palette. Like this is if you're using wax paper like me. But I reuse my palettes like over and over again. The less it goes into landfill, the better. Yeah, I know. You can tell I really like colors because I've been streaming for 2.5 hours. Thank you for the thank you for the time check. I promise this will be the last one. The last one, okay? Sorry, Joe. This will be the last one. Okay, so I have a phthalo cyan blue-green shade is the technical term for the phthalo blue. Sometimes you'll see like there's like phthalo blue-green shade, phthalo blue-red shade, ultramarine blue green shade, ultramarine blue red, like it gets very specific, but if you were to pick one out, then the phthalo blue is closer to green, and ultramarine blue is closer to red, right? So I actually want to show you how that translates. Because I get asked a lot about what types of greens should I get? Or what types of blues should I get? And so this is going to answer that question. Okay, so this is my phthalo. Okay, there's my phthalo blue. And so if I added white to it, I've used up all my white already. Okay. Yeah, it's a very, very nice shade of blue. So if you look at most skies, next time you go out there and you look at a blue sky, okay, you'll notice that the sky shifts from phthalo to ultramarine. It's like more phthalo as it gets to the horizon line and more ultramarine as it gets to the, as it goes higher up. It's pretty cool. So you can either, if you're starting out, then just get a primary blue. Okay, you don't need fancy blue. You don't need two blues. Just get a primary blue, and then you can add primary red to it to shift it towards more of an ultramarine, right? And then you can add yellow to it to shift it towards more of a phthalo. Okay, these two blues are so beautiful. Like, do you guys know that like ultramarine blue, I don't know if it was specifically ultramarine blue, but there was a, like blue pigment was really, really expensive back in the day. And back in the day where tubed paints did not exist and you would have to go to like the apothecary and get these fine powders and then mix it with linseed oil to get, you know, your desired colors. And blue was like really, really expensive. So in old paintings, like if you look at the paintings from the Renaissance and like the Baroque, or like even like the Dark Ages where we didn't really have that much technology, blues are very rarely used. And when they were used, they were only used on like paintings of the Virgin Mary, or like if someone was painting royalty and, you know, they could afford that blue. That's the only time that they would use it. Fun little bit of art history for you. Oh, that is way too dark. So you can see, like, if I squint, I can see that this color is too dark. There we go. Yeah, now as commoners get to use it. Lapis. Yeah, I think that was it. That was it. Thank you for helping me look it up. I don't know when ultramarine blue was invented. It's a beautiful color. Definitely one of my recommended colors. Great for landscapes, great for greens. These two blues are both great for greens. Okay, so you can see that the ultramarine blue, right, is duller. Okay, so one's closer to purple, one's closer to green, and in terms of saturation, your phthalo blue wins. Okay. What happens when you add yellow to ultramarine? Good question. So if you added yellow to ultramarine, you would get like a less saturated green, right? So you might, if you add yellow to ultramarine, you might get this green right here. If you added yellow to your phthalo blue, right, you're gonna get a green that's closer to this range, right? How do you control saturation? You would control saturation by using brighter pigments and sort of shifting, like adding more of your yellows and reds as you add whites to the paint. So I don't know if that makes sense. How would the blue shift? So this blue, you can see as I'm adding white to it, it gets less and less saturated, right? Technically, it's happening over here too, but the phthalo blue is brighter. So when you get like a primary set of colors, your blue is technically closer to phthalo blue. Because if you think about cyan, right? Cyan is kind of more closer to a phthalo blue. Cyan appears to be more green, right? So if you are mixing like a teal, like let's say you wanted to mix like a bright teal color, you would need to use your phthalo. You could never get a teal color that's nice with ultramarine, right? So that's kind of how I would think about it. Would the ultramarine shift more yellow? What do you mean? Would the ultramarine shift more yellow? If I added yellow to it? The phthalo blue looks slightly darker with the lightest one. Yeah, it does, but if you squint at it, right? Like, that's a really good question. So if you squint at this, right? They're the same value, but I think I got it pretty close, but the phthalo blue is more saturated, right? So it appears to be darker. even though it's not technically darker. However, if you look at this blue, if you look at the ultramarine blue looks to be more saturated at this value. So strangely enough, every single pigment is more saturated at a specific value. So for example, the red would probably, the peak saturation of this red would be straight out of the tube. Like straight out of the tube, if I put that red down, it would be super, super saturated. Maybe if I add like a tiny bit of white to it, it would be super saturated, right? But you can see like when I add white to that red, it's already less saturated than this red, right? With ultramarine blue, this, if I add a little bit of white to it, it appears more saturated than this dark color. Even though technically the dark color has more pigment, it's at such a dark value that it's hard to see that pigment, right? So here is when that blue comes alive at this mid value range. And then if you look at over here, right, once I start adding more white to it, this blue takes over. So you can see that they have different saturations at different values. All right, so Ja Redstone, I want to answer your question. The phthalo looks slightly darker with the lightest one, but that might just be the saturation. How do you control saturation as in less yellow? How would the blue shift? Would the ultramarine shift more yellow? I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. Are you saying like, would this blue shift to be more yellow if I added yellow to it? Go one lower. Oh, if I painted another value? Like if I went lighter than this? If I went lighter than this color, it would get even less saturated. I don't mean more yellow, I mean would it look like the phthalo? As in it gets cooler? No, it would never really look like the phthalo. Like the only way I could get the ultramarine to look more like the phthalo is if I added a brighter yellow to it. But even then, it'll still be a duller phthalo. Like phthalo blue and ultramarine blue are kind of special colors because remember, blue is a primary color, right? So primary colors are harder to mix out of other colors. So if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to turn the ultramarine and I added a little bit of yellow to it. Oops. If I wanted to, hold on a second. I'm making a mess here. Whoops. Okay, so if I wanted to add, let's see what happens when I add yellow to ultramarine. See how it makes, one sec. So if I add just my primary yellow to my ultramarine, right, see how it makes like a dull green? I'll show you. Makes a dull green. You might be able to see it better if I just add a little bit of white to it. Okay, so see the green that it makes? Okay, it makes a dull green. Why? Because ultramarine has red in it. Okay, so you could mix an ultramarine with a primary blue and a touch of primary red. Did you add a fair bit of yellow? Yes, I did. Like, that was my pile and it's like nearly gone. So if you want to mix a really bright green, then you can use your phthalo blue. Right, so if I use my phthalo blue, and then I add yellow, to it. Now look at that green. It's like super saturated. It's actually very transparent too, because both of these colors are transparent. So unfortunately, I kind of have to add a little bit of white for you guys to even see what I'm doing. Let's try this again. That yellow, I didn't take out enough yellow because yellow is like one of those colors that's like so weak that you have to constantly be taking it out. Okay, so let me add some white to this color. So look at the difference in the greens, guys, right? One is a lot greener because the phthalo blue is closer to green. And the ultramarine blue is closer to purple. Yes, color theory is very complex. Is it possible to get phthalo and ultramarine by starting with the 3 primary colors? Yes, it is possible. If you used a primary blue to get phthalo, you just add a touch of yellow, and to get ultramarine, you would add a touch of red. So yes, absolutely. How would you go about deciding which hue to shift towards when painting shadows? It depends on your background, right? It really depends on the context. So, for example, if you are painting, let's see, how do I explain this? If you're painting something with a blue background, right, and the light source is the moon, then everything would be pretty much monochromatic, and everything would shift towards that blue, right? But if you are painting, like, let's say a something with a blue background, but it's like daylight and the light source is the sun, right? Then you would get warmer highlights and cooler shadows, typically speaking. If you're painting an interior, and let's say the interior is like candle lit, right? Then you would get very warm highlights and midtones, and like the shadows would be pretty much black. Right? Like the really, really dramatic shadows. Since we did green, I really feel like I should talk about purple too. I'm sorry, Joe. This is going on for a lot longer than I expected, but I feel like this should be the last thing. The reason why I suggest getting 2 different kinds of blue, I know, LOL, sorry, Joe. Hopefully it's interesting enough, but if you got a dip, no worries. Okay, maybe we'll do a part 2 of this stream because it seems like you guys have a lot of questions. But I just want to show you how I would paint really bright purples and what these 2 types of blues and like how they would affect your purples. Okay. Figure drawing and color theory. I'm just passionate about like art in general, but definitely color theory. There's just so much to talk about. And because now we have digital art. Before, when I learned color theory, I didn't learn any color theory on digital. Like, it just wasn't a thing. The only thing we learned was that digital colors use the RGB color wheel, which is additive color, which is a whole other thing, like whole other beast, whole other color wheel actually. But since you guys, you know, are interested in traditional stuff, then I'm gonna show you like how these two blues will affect the secondary colors. So the primary color is the blue itself, and then the secondary, but within primaries, there's like warms and cools, right? Warms and cools. And so they will affect the secondary colors differently. So it does, like the same thing happens when you're using other primaries as well. But purples and greens, I find a lot of people struggle with. So if I was to paint a purple and like I take this ultramarine and I add some red to it. Where's my ultramarine? My brush is probably a little bit murky, but it kind of makes a nice purple. If I wanted to get that purple brighter, right, I would just add red and white to it and see how it makes like a little bit of a pink, right? Is it pink? Is it purple? Depends on the context. Right, so those are kind of two shades of purple that I mixed with ultramarine. You can see that they're pretty close to the ultramarine, right? But if I tried to mix the same purple, like it might work if I use phthalo, but phthalo has more greens in it. So the purple is going to be duller. Like it's just not going to be the same kind of purple. Right? You can think of phthalo blue as having yellows in it. And what happens when you add yellows? Like what happens when you add yellows to purples? If anyone was answering in their head, it dulls it, right? If you mix opposite colors, it dulls the other color. So if I wanted to make it like a more vibrant purple and I try to add red and white to it, right? I could get like a somewhat a nice purple. But the two ranges are very different, right? So if you want your vibrant greens, use phthalo, right? And if you want your vibrant purples, use ultramarine. Okay, guys, so I think that I'm gonna end this stream here. So thank you so much for, I'm gonna end the demo here actually, but thank you so much for sticking around for all your questions. I had a lot of fun, even though we were just painting swatches and such. But yeah, feel free to join the Discord, become a member, and you can get live critiques from our team. And if you've been painting along or drawing along, following along, and if you found value in this video, give it a like. And any questions that you have about color that I did not answer, please leave them in the comments and maybe we will do a part 2. Okay, so thanks guys for coming. If you didn't know already, our mission at Wing Canvas is to make art education easily accessible to everyone. And so if you want to support the channel, definitely consider becoming a member. So as a member, you get members only chat and critique, as well as files from our streams, mostly digital art files, as well as pre-video releases and monthly class recordings for the higher tiers. And you get these nifty badges if you're a YouTube member. And best of all, you get live critiques from our staff and our instructors. So my critiques are Fridays, and even if you're a member on the lower tier, you can still put your artwork up in the members chat, and sometimes we will give you asynchronous feedback. All right, guys, thanks so much again, and I will see you in the next stream. Join Iggy tomorrow. Iggy will be drawing backgrounds for your characters, which was really fun too. All right, guys, bye.